Hello, I'm Ed Fuquay, young adult librarian extraordinaire here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
Solitaire Frisbee from the children's room.
And we're here for another conversation for the big finale of Greek gods.
The finale.
Yes.
Woo.
We're covering the rest of the Olympians today. Now, if you cast your mind back to our last exciting episode, now Zeus had conquered the Titans, and he and his next generation of gods had taken over the face of the earth, which he had divided up amongst his brothers. And he had the Cyclops build a mighty city for him called Mount Olympus. Mm-hmm. So it's a gorgeous city. It's always depicted with huge Greek columns everywhere, all white marble and so forth. So this is going to be the home of the gods. They call themselves the Olympians after Olympus. And Zeus wanted there to be 12. Right now there were 6 or 5 depending on how you count it. Because Hades, his brother, Zeus's brother, didn't have a throne in Olympus.
Right.
Yes, he lived in the underworld and basically stayed there all the time, sulking and brooding over the unfair deal that he got.
Well, I would too. I mean, if Poseidon's in the ocean and he still gets a throne.
He got the short end of the stick, definitely. Yeah, Poseidon still gets a throne. They say he tried to stay in Olympus as much as possible to stay close to Zeus because he didn't trust his older brother. So you had Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, along with Hera, Demeter, Hestia, and Aphrodite. Aphrodite hasn't arrived yet.
Oh.
Yes. I jumped ahead of myself. First, I wanted to mention that Zeus wanted 12 Olympians, and you asked me once if that was where our 12-month calendar comes from. And at the time, I said yes, but I was technically wrong. It wasn't the Greeks that gave us the 12-month calendar. They had a much more logical and sensible calendar. The calendar we have now is a result mostly of the Romans.
Right.
The Romans stole everything they could from Greece, including their gods and their calendar. But being Romans, they couldn't resist putting their grubby fingerprints all over it. You've ever wondered why October, the start of oct, means 8, like an octopus. But it's not the 8th month of the year, is it? The same way sept means 7, but it's not the 7th month of the year. Mm-hmm. That's because after the Romans got their hands on the calendar, first Julius Caesar and then Augustus, his successor, wanted their own months. So they invented July and August, which pushed back the rest of the months. They no longer make as much sense as they did when the Greeks were running the calendar.
I see.
So that's where our calendar comes from. So,
I've known some people like that.
Yeah. So Aphrodite. Now, I've actually mentioned Aphrodite before because she actually predates the creation of the gods. When Kronos defeated Uranus and unmanned him and sent the genitals hurling through the sky, some of his seed literally fell into the ocean foam, and it created something exquisite and new.
That's right.
A creature of pure beauty, Aphrodite. And she didn't make an appearance for quite some time after that. She played no role in the battle against the Titans. Normally, Zeus would be all sulky about that. But Aphrodite literally makes love, not war. She had nothing to do with the war against the Titans. But once it was settled, though, everybody had a nice place to live and comfy, pillows, on the divans and everything. She was willing to show up in Olympus. Even though she was technically a Titan, being the offspring of Uranus, she was instantly accepted by all the gods, all the male gods at least, because people love making Aphrodite happy. It's just one of those things, and she loved being happy, so it was a good arrangement. Hera was immediately suspicious of her. The male gods were just too deferential towards Aphrodite. She saw trouble ahead. But for the time being, Aphrodite settled in. She was, of course, the goddess of love. She was the embodiment of physical beauty. She was the goddess both of the spirit of love, spiritual love, and physical love. She embodied both of them at once, because the Greeks, Her name Aphrodite gives us aphrodisiacs, which put people in the mood for love. And her Roman name was Venus. She gets a very nice planet named after her. A very prominent one in the sky, because you want Venus always to be shining down on you. Unfortunately, the name Venus also gives us diseases associated with sex, such as venereal diseases. So that would not please Aphrodite to remember it in that fashion. She is associated with doves, swans, and mirrors. She was very vain. And so she had this hand mirror she would admire herself in. Several artists in the Renaissance used that. Renaissance artists loved the Greek goddesses because they wore very little, usually no clothing. Mm-hmm. And you couldn't get away with nudes in those days, but if it's a classical subject, of course, then it was all right.
Right.
So there you go. Lots of great depictions of Aphrodite out there. The worshippers of Ishtar and Inanna, those are the goddesses that go back to ancient Sumeria and Babylon. I mentioned them when we went through that section. They were still being worshipped. Mm-hmm. Those goddesses were still being worshipped. And their worship was sort of subsumed by Aphrodite. She absorbed their worshippers as if she was somehow all goddesses in one. Mm-hmm. Among her worshippers in ancient Greece were the professional prostitutes. They did the job of Venus on the streets, all the way from the Hetaira, which is the very high-class courtesans that charged a lot and only moved in the best of societies, to the ones on the street who did, what they had to do to stay alive. And the lowest-class prostitutes in ancient Greece were known as pornai. And so their name continues on into present time,
right,
referring to pornography, adult entertainment. Mm-hmm. And it would probably please Aphrodite a great deal to know that her worshippers are still remembered to this day. By the way, the biological symbol for women, the circle with like the cross underneath of it, it originally was supposed to represent the mirror that Venus holds. It is a symbol of Venus, actually. So that's how Aphrodite joined the pantheon. So meanwhile, Hera and Zeus settled down. Hera was very happy being married to the king of the gods, but Hera was the goddess of domesticity. She wanted everything to be perfect. She had this image in mind of a perfect husband and a perfect, child and a perfect life and so forth. And so she wanted to produce as many children as possible, mostly because she knew that Zeus had a wandering eye. So the more of her own children she could produce, the better off she would be. So they did what they do, and eventually Hera got pregnant. But as soon as she gave birth, she knew it wasn't exactly what she had in mind. The baby that came out, he's always described as ugly in every myth. He's described as being dark and hairy, and it just did not fit Hera's perfect view at all. Fortunately, she can have more babies. So she tossed the newborn, she named him Hephaestus, and she tossed him out the window and forgot all about him. It was a horribly cruel thing to do, but yeah. And the worst part is for Hera, of course, is that she's not very genre savvy, as they say on TV tropes. Since when you dismiss someone in a mythological story, it always comes back to bite you. So she forgot all about little baby Hephaestus, assuming that he would die dashed to the rocks, thousands of miles below at the base of Mount Olympus. Meanwhile, she had a hard time getting together with Zeus because Zeus had a headache. He actually once in his life had an actual headache. And it was so excruciating, he begged any of the gods to do whatever it takes to make the headache go away. So eventually they grabbed him, they held him down, and they wound up smashing his head open with a hammer. And what should happen but a fully grown goddess pops out of his head, wearing a full suit of armor, and then an owl flies through the window and lands on her shoulder. She has a spear, she has a shield, and an owl. It's Athena, a goddess born fully grown from the brow of Zeus. He gave birth to her without the aid of a woman, although actually she is the infant, the fetus, that was inside Metis when he swallowed her.
Right.
So she is the offspring of the Titaness of wisdom, and she herself would go on to become the goddess of wisdom in the Greek pantheon. She gestated completely to adulthood inside of Zeus's body and then burst out of his brow. Perhaps because she was born of Zeus rather than of a goddess, she was always very much a daddy's girl. In conflict, she would vote on Zeus's side every time. Mm-hmm. And when the Titan Typhon escaped from his chains and attacked Olympus, the other gods fled, and only Athena stayed behind to defend Olympus with her father. She became the goddess of defensive warfare and the goddess of cunning in battle, the goddess of strategy. She was the smart goddess, the goddess of wisdom. She was also the goddess of craftsmen, anyone who made complicated things with their hands. Not so much like blacksmithing that another god would come along and handle that, but like weavers and things like that, and seamstresses were all under her purview. She was the goddess of cunning, tactics, strategy, and of philosophy. Thinking requires great dexterity too. So she's often considered to be a cut above the other gods. She was the patroness of heroes like Perseus. Both Perseus of mythology and Percy Jackson of the Reardon books would all turn to Athena in times of need, and she would give the heroes what they need to survive. She helped Bellerophon capture the winged steed Pegasus and so forth. She was the go-to goddess if you were a hero in ancient Greece. And you could more or less trust her that she wasn't going to screw you over. She was pretty upfront. She did not have a quick temper. She was not incredibly vain or egotistical. She was generally depicted as being level-headed, with a few exceptions. She's responsible for the Arachne story. Now, Arachne was a weaver who created things that were so exquisitely beautiful. She publicly boasted that they were the equal of anything Athena could weave. And word got back to Athena. So she was very insulted.
Oh.
In ancient Greece, one of the most terrible sins you can commit is hubris, believing you are above the gods. So she went and challenged Arachne to a contest.
So Arachne was a human.
She was a human, but not for long. You can see where this is going.
Ooh.
Yeah. So they had a contest, and Athena won. And to punish Arachne for her arrogance, she was transformed. And she was changed into a spider. So she would spend the rest of her days weaving, and all of her offspring would spend their days weaving for the rest of time. And to this day, spiders are referred to as arachnids.
Right.
Yeah.
There is an arachnid, a spider, garden spider, and in their web they make a zigzag pattern, and it is the coolest, most intricate web I've ever seen.
Well, Arachne was a great weaver, and her offspring remains so to this day.
Clearly.
The story was first recorded by Ovid in Roman times under the reign of Augustus, so it might actually be as old as the Greek myths. And Ovid meant it as a metaphor for how creative people are treated when a tyrant is in charge.
Oh, interesting.
It was his subtle dig at Augustus, actually.
Ah.
Which is why it's when Athena kind of acts out of character to fit the nature of the story that he was writing.
Okay.
She does not have a planet named after her. She has a very large asteroid, however, which is nothing to sneeze at. Now, her most famous contribution to the world was that she and Poseidon, who was her arch rival for some reason, both wanted to become patrons of a very large, successful city-state in ancient Greece. Mm-hmm. And so Poseidon showered them with gifts, trying to impress them with his power and his might and so forth. And what Athena did for the people of that nameless city was she gave them the olive. She taught them how to grow and cultivate olives. Now, the olive was the most important cash crop of the ancient days. It was so useful. You could eat them. You could store them. They lasted a whole long time. And they produced olive oil that they used for everything. You cooked in olive oil. You lubricated cartwheels with olive oil. Olive oil had 1,001 uses in those days. And so it was the olive that made this city-state so popular and successful. Mm-hmm. And so in honor of Athena, they named their city Athens.
Right.
It was the most popular city in the ancient world. And it became, today, Athens is still, to this day, the capital of Greece. And in the middle of Athens sits the Parthenon, which is their huge temple to the worship of Athena. And parts of it are still standing after more than 2,000 years. So when they put up a monument, they certainly did it right. So that was Athena.
Manufacturers today could take a note.
Oh, yeah. They built to last in those days. And this is with having been blown up twice in 2 different wars. The Greek Civil War and World War I. It was shelled both times. And someone also tore it down and started using the limestone to make cement for roads when they started paving that part of Greece. And yet you can go there today and it is still standing.
Wow.
Parts of it anyway.
That's amazing.
Yeah. The Doric columns of the Parthenon would be inspired a lot of the modern government buildings and so forth. All right, but not all the Greek gods are as even-tempered as Athena. She kind of stands out for being so mellow. So Hera and Zeus got together again, mm-hmm. and Hera gave birth again. This time she was much more pleased with the offspring. Like all gods, he grew up very rapidly. However, he did not grow up to be a very nice guy. He was surly, he was rude, he was kind of hard to get along with, had a perpetual chip on his shoulder, constantly quarreling with people. They called him Ares, and he became the god of war. He's the god of war, of slaughter, of violence. He's the god of brute force, whereas Athena is the goddess of finesse. And Greek heroes generally knew which god or goddess they were patrons of. You can see them dividing up in the Trojan War, literally. Odysseus was an Athena man. Achilles, not so much, So yes, Ares was the god of war. He was such a troublemaker that Hera and Zeus had this plan to calm him down. And so they decided, okay, well, he was very attracted to Aphrodite. I mean, they were all very attracted to Aphrodite. But the thing was, Aphrodite was also attracted to him. I mean, she could have literally anyone in creation. And he was known for his quick temper, but apparently she liked it a little rough sometimes. She was definitely attracted to Ares. And so they decided, Mars and Venus, they should get together. There'll never be trouble there. So they arranged this huge wedding, invited everyone. All the nymphs showed up, and Zeus even pardoned some titans for the occasion and so forth. And among the other things, they had brand new thrones to sit on. And so Hera really had to try out the bright, shiny new throne. But no sooner did she sit on the throne than suddenly these metal bands clasped that held her wrists and ankles together, and she couldn't get out. The throne was unbreakable. She was completely trapped. And some version of the story, it levitates and turns her upside down. So she is humiliated, she is angry, she is shrieking to get me out of here. Zeus tries, he almost fries her with a thunderbolt, no good. Ares, well, first of all, Zeus declares when he fails that whatever god manages to free her from the throne can marry Aphrodite as motivation. So Ares, who is by far the strongest of the gods physically, is a shoo-in, which is probably what Zeus had in mind when he made that promise. So Ares comes striding up, grabs the throne, pulls and sweats and strains, and cannot budge it. It will not release her. She is completely trapped. And then, among the wedding guests, who should stroll forward but a kind of not too handsome guy with a beard. He's kind of crook-backed and is walking with a bad limp, as if when he was a baby, someone hurled him out of a window down on the rocks.
I can see how that would,
It's baby Hephaestus, who's come back to the bosom of his loving family. And he goes, "Oh, my mother, you're trapped in a magic throne. Let me help you." And so he, de-levitates it and hits a hidden button, and it pops open, and Hera is free.
Now, was he the creator of the device?
He created the throne.
Okay.
It was all something he had set up. And you get to marry Aphrodite.
Right.
Who he was very attracted to her. How she felt about him was kind of iffy. She didn't hate him or anything, but at the same time, she seemed to be willing to settle for Ares, but with Hephaestus, it was different. It's funny because the Greek gods can change shape, but Hephaestus is always referred to as ugly. And some people like Hephaestus because of that, because he doesn't care how he looks. The Greeks worship perfection. The Greeks worshipped beauty. Mm-hmm. And Hephaestus didn't fit in that. Hephaestus was good at what he did. He was smart. And he cared about that more than looking beautiful. Mm-hmm. Him marrying Aphrodite was like, the school geek marrying the head cheerleader, basically.
So you said that they had the option to change.
Yeah.
So does logic go astray here? Because if that were the case, why would she toss them if he, in fact, could just change?
I don't know. Okay. It's like he's not cursed. He doesn't have to be ugly, and yet he always is. So Hephaestus is there. We'll come back to him in a minute. So Ares is kind of stuck now. Aphrodite goes off with Hephaestus to the volcano where he lives. He's a master craftsman, hammering out things for people. Mm-hmm. She gets bored there in due course, slips back to Olympus whenever possible, and who should she run into but Ares? So, of course, they get together whenever they can. Whenever the gods are looking the other direction, they're sneaking off together.
Right.
Hephaestus isn't dumb. He is, in fact, extremely intelligent. Uh-huh. So one time when Ares and Aphrodite are snuggling up together, they feel this gentle weight fall upon them, and they start struggling and they can't move. It's like an invisible net has trapped them, because that's exactly what has happened. He's woven a net so thin, Hephaestus has, that he can't even see it, and descends down on them, and it can't be broken. Absolutely unbreakable. So he drags them away from their little love nest and like hangs them up in full view of all the gods of Olympus to basically laugh at. So there they are, buck naked, squirming around inside this net. Ares is getting angrier and angrier, and there's nothing he can do. Eventually, Hephaestus releases them, but he'd proved his point. Aphrodite still cheated on him, but after that, she was much more careful. Maybe over the years, he got more tolerant of her straying. We really don't know because they don't go into a lot of details of the nature of their relationship. It just sort of happened. Now, Ares.
Oh, wait,
yes, go ahead.
Were there any children that came from their union?
No.
Okay. What about her and Ares?
I think so. I'm not sure, though.
Okay.
I did not look that up. Okay. Ares was god of war. His sacred things were the woodpecker, because they believed that woodpeckers had red feathers because their head had been dipped in blood.
Interesting.
And the dog, because they used dogs in war in those days. So dogs are a very familiar sight on the battlefield, and vultures for obvious reasons.
Yep.
Ares, in his Roman form, is called Mars. And it is from Mars that we get the martial arts. If you practice any martial art, you're literally practicing the art of Mars. He gets a very popular planet named after him, because looked at with the naked eye, Mars in the sky appears to have a slightly reddish tint, like it's been covered in blood. Mars was called the Red Planet, going back way back in history. Also, the male symbol, the circle with the thing coming off of it, was originally meant to represent Ares' shield with his spear sticking out of it.
Very cool.
Yeah. So at this point, Hephaestus has joined the rest of them on Olympus. He gets a throne. He can make a throne himself that won't trap him. But he also spends a lot of time inside his volcano making stuff. He is the master craftsman. In Greek myths, if you want something, you go and petition Hephaestus to make it for you. So
with the addition of Hephaestus, we are at how many gods?
Let's see. We have 5 to start with. 6 with Aphrodite. So that's Athena is 7, Ares is 8, Hephaestus is 9.
Okay.
So Hephaestus did not get a planet named after him. His Roman name is Vulcan, however, so we had an imaginary planet named after him, the planet Vulcan in Star Trek. And that was depicted because they imagined Vulcan as a desert planet, where it was incredibly hot all the time, and Hephaestus / Vulcan was associated with heat, the heat of the forge. He lived inside a volcano where he pounded out swords and shields and magical weapons for all the gods to fight with. And when a volcano was like belching fire and smoke, that was Hephaestus at work at his forge, they always said. Mount Etna was his normal working place, so that erupted several times in ancient Greek days. And from Vulcan, we get the word volcano. And to this day, scientists who study volcanoes are referred to as volcanologists, because they study the work of Vulcan. So that's Hephaestus.
He really just epitomizes the story of an underdog, and he fought his way back. So, I mean, did he was just given the throne because they finally decided?
They had to admit he could do things the other gods couldn't. He was the one that Zeus went to when he had to have something built. I need this immediately, and Hephaestus will, pound it out.
Cool. So he fought his way back, and then he earned his.
He fought his way back and earned the respect of the other gods. Even
cool.
Hera, I'm sure, was grudgingly willing to admit that he played an important role in their pantheon. So meanwhile, Zeus was not idle, as you can well imagine. At the wedding of Hephaestus and Aphrodite, he saw a nymph dancing named Leto. She was, of course, extremely attractive. That goes without saying. She was also the daughter of Atlas, the physically strongest of all the Titans. So she had a very strong bloodline. Zeus definitely wanted some of that. So he got together with her, and she had a very difficult birth. For one thing, because Hera found out it was chasing her across the face of the earth. So she was forced to hide in a cave and give birth by herself. In some versions, the she-bear actually assists her in the delivery. How useful that was, I don't know. And she was in a lot of pain, partly because she was actually carrying twins. And she gave birth to a baby girl, which she named Artemis. But then the second sibling got stuck in the birth canal. The fetus got twisted around. So Artemis had to reach in and adjust her brother's position so he could give birth. So she could give birth to him. Mm-hmm. And the boy was named Apollo. So these are the twins of Greek mythology. And they're opposites. They don't have much in common. One's male, one's female. One is silver and the other is gold. Artemis is associated with the moon. She's a goddess of the moon. Apollo is associated with the sun. Artemis loved wild things, the mountains, animals, like the she-bear that helped her give birth to her brother. Whereas Apollo liked fine things, sensitive things. You know, he liked music, he liked art, poetry. He was always entertained by the muses, you know, sing me a song, O muses, and that kind of thing. So yeah, Artemis was out, like, you know, sleeping by a campfire, and Apollo was on his like cushiony pillow back in Olympus. So they were twins, and they have individual stories. They almost never do anything together. Now, from an early age, Artemis declares that she will never know the touch of man. Now, right. Athena also famously never was with anyone romantically. That's partly because she's considered to be above it all. Sexual desire was kind of a passion, a madness to the Greeks. And Athena would not lower herself to rut like a common animal. However, Artemis went one better. She just shunned the touch of man, not women, mind you, just man. Artemis was still considered a virgin, although how they defined a virgin in ancient Greece was slightly different than we do now. Let's just say Artemis was not necessarily inexperienced in the ways of love. She just never knew the touch of man.
Gotcha.
She went around surrounded by nymphs who lived in the woods with her. They followed her around. She was hunting all the time. She was riding. She was sending her hounds out. She was feisty. She was quick-tempered. Like I said, surrounded by women. She was the goddess of women. She's the goddess of the moon, which was given to her when she was a baby by Zeus, very magnanimous of him. And she was also a goddess of childbirth, despite vowing to never experience it herself. Because she had helped give birth to her brother, women still called on Artemis for a difficult birth. So she's a goddess of childbirth. Her Roman name was Diana. She was the goddess of the hunt. And Diana, among all the ancient Greek names, Diana is still really popular. There's tons of famous Dianas in the modern world, including, of course, Diana Prince, was Wonder Woman's real name. Princess Diana of Themyscira was an Amazon who, like Artemis, grew up on an island where no woman knew the touch of man. And as goddess of the hunt, Wonder Woman in the comics has called upon her namesake goddess more than once to track something or to hunt someone down. When she catches criminals, she is literally a manhunter. Artemis became important to the LGBTQ movement when they began organizing, especially in the 1800s and the Victorian age. Groups of women who gathered together, referred to as Dianic groups of women, after Diana. She was considered the patron goddess of lesbians. And she remains very important to that community to this day. Apollo, on the other hand, was more the god of civilization rather than wild things. Exactly how he felt about women, we don't know. He never made a vow not to let a woman touch him. He was almost entirely surrounded by men his entire life. There are very few stories involving Apollo in any males. Apollo was the goddess of music, poetry. He liked order. He liked reason. He liked handsome young men. He is the patron of the muses, the arts belong to him, all the arts. Interestingly, of all the ancient gods, he has no Roman name. Stephen Fry says Apollo is always Apollo. He doesn't get a planet named after him. They did name the Apollo space program after him, which NASA used to go to the moon. So he has that going for him. So he has two more members of the pantheon. But Zeus wasn't satisfied. He wanted more. So he impregnated another nymph named Maya, and she gave birth to a god who immediately was a troublemaker. He was a little baby Hermes. He came out being able to walk and talk, and he was a troublemaker. Almost as soon as he was born, on the first night he was born, according to some versions of the story, he rushes out and he sees a bunch of cattle, never seen cattle before, really likes them, so he grabs them and brings them back to his mother as a present, a whole herd of cattle. And along the way he grabs a tortoise. And he gives the tortoise to his mother and says she should kill it and make it into turtle soup for them. And so also they sacrificed some of the cattle to the gods. Always a good, safe thing. Always a safe bet to sacrifice to the gods. So who should happen along but Apollo? Because these were the cattle of the sun. They belong to Apollo. And he is enraged someone would touch his cattle. Everyone knows they're sacred. And so little baby Hermes, of course, is totally unfazed by this. He takes the empty tortoise shell after they've eaten it, and he takes some of the intestines from the cattle that they've killed. And he runs the intestines around the tortoise shell and ties them off really tight, and then plucks them. And it makes the most beautiful noise that Apollo has ever heard. He's the god of music, mind you. So he says, "Why, Uncle Hermes, look, I've invented you a new musical instrument that no one has ever seen before. I call it the lyre." Named after himself, of course. And so Apollo has to admit this lyre is really very handy. Later, Apollo would improve on it. He would make an ivory-like frame for it and something other than, cattle guts as strings. But it was a genius idea. And once Hermes diplomatically points out that he's already sacrificed some of the cattle to Zeus, surely he wouldn't want to get upset about that. So Hermes has no choice but to grumble and walk away. Or Apollo has no choice to grumble and walk away. So Hermes is the trickster god of Greek mythology. Because a lot of pantheons have that trickster god, and all the gods have taken themselves pretty seriously till Hermes comes along. Yeah, Hermes doesn't care about decorum. He just does what he does. Possibly because he could walk the day he was born. He was super fast. Zeus named him the messenger of the gods.
So is he like an adult from day one?
He starts walking and talking as a baby in most of the stories, but he grows up pretty quickly. Exactly how time passes in Greek myths is a real mystery. He's probably an adult by the time he reaches like Zeus's court.
Okay.
He also, like Apollo, never has a beard or any chest hair. He's described as being, his body is hairless.
Yep.
And whenever he's depicted, he's almost inevitably naked. He would go on to become the spokesperson of a flower delivery company, FTD. But in those days, he was more famously known as the god of roads. He was the god of roads and trails. He was the god of flocks. So shepherds and cattlemen worshipped him because he stole a whole herd of cattle on his first day. So yeah, obviously god of flocks. He was the god of diplomacy. Mm-hmm. And he was the god of writing, because you have to write these things down if you're going to have a treaty with another group. So he became the god of writing.
Right.
And he's the god of thieves. If he literally stole something the day he was born, he was embraced by thieves the world over. So he has super speed, and he's a thief. He was the messenger of the gods. He was Zeus's herald. He pops up frequently in the Iliad and the Odyssey, always delivering an important message from Zeus or delivering that super weapon that the hero needs at the last minute from Hephaestus' volcano. You ask Hermes to rush in and do it. To do his job better, Hephaestus made him sandals that were wings so he could fly, and also a metal winged helmet. He was the embodiment of speed. The Golden Age Flash in the comic books wears a metal helmet with wings on the side in honor of Hermes. And interestingly, he's the god of diplomacy. He carried a staff that indicated that he represented Zeus and the gods.
Right.
And so long as he carried that staff, he couldn't be touched. He could walk onto any battlefield and no one would harm him. He had diplomatic immunity.
But only with the staff?
Only with the staff indicated that he did. But he started the concept of, the flag of truce or parley or something like that. It was the worship of Hermes that invented that idea that you should be able to still communicate with someone even though you're at war. And that can lead to treaties and diplomacy and wars being ended with less bloodshed.
Very cool.
That was the beginning of all of that. His Roman name is Mercury. And Mercury gets a planet named after him, of course. It's the smallest planet. However, it also is the fastest. It orbits the sun in 88 days. So even without a telescope, the Romans could tell that it was a very speedy little devil zipping across the sky like that. Another name for him they had in those days, it was something like, I can't remember what it is in Latin. The Latin phrase for watery metal. It was a metal that was a liquid at room temperature. And that became very important to alchemists in the Middle Ages. It was a silvery metal that was very hard to hold on to. They called it quicksilver. And quicksilver we know today as mercury. It's the temperature-sensitive stuff they put in thermometers. And Quicksilver is also the name of the super speedster at Marvel Comics rather than DC Comics. So nobody in comics can go very far without running into a Greek or Roman god. Which actually, when his addition to the pantheon actually gives you 12. However, there's one more god. So technically there are 13 Olympians. What happened was, according to most of the myths, Hestia stepped down because she was tired of all the fighting amongst the gods. She just wanted peace and quiet. And she stepped down from her role and gave her throne up to Dionysus. Now, Dionysus is kind of an oddball for the Greek gods. He was also born of Zeus, but he was raised to manhood outside of Olympus. And Hera inflicted him with madness when he was very young. So he wandered across the face of Greece as a crazy person for years until he settled down. He became the god of wine. He showed mankind how to cultivate grapes, how to make wine out of it. He's also the god of excess. They believed that wine meant you were out of control. So he was the god of chaos. So he brought this chaotic element everywhere that he went. So in some ways, he was bad news. But on the other hand, he was the party-hardy god. He brewed the best wine, literally. He had women who worshipped him. He was also a very sexual god, very handsome, also beardless, I believe. Unlike Zeus and Poseidon and Ares and so forth. He was carried about by his followers, women who were called Maenads. And they're famous for, in the middle of their orgies, losing control completely and suddenly cannibalizing their partners. So, wild parties for a little while, and then you should back down before they get out of control.
You did just say they were famous for this. So,
yeah.
So, party goers
yeah.
knew to expect this?
Yeah, basically.
And went anyway?
Yeah. Well, it was a great party. The spirit of Bacchus was still called upon in days of ancient Rome, even knowing things can get out of hand. The ability to spot when things are going south and, shutting off the music must have been an important skill in those days. The fact they have a god whose whole message to mankind is, don't go too far, or, he'll wind up like me. He is officially a Greek god. However, he is so odd that many people believe that he was invented as part of a separate mythology, that he wasn't invented at the same time the Greeks came up with the rest of the gods, that he was probably sort of like glued on from a totally different pantheon, but no one knows from where. He was probably a rustic god of the rural areas, and as Athens and Sparta conquered more cities, they encountered more of these pagan cults. And Bacchus made the grade of all the ancient gods whose worshippers got wiped out. Bacchus, for whatever reason, made the grade and was adopted into the Greek gods. And he would go on to be a part of Roman worship as well. The Romans called him Bacchus. He was very important in all the festivals. You summoned Bacchus for every big important event in Rome. The phrase Bacchanalia, which refers to a wild party, you sometimes see that used. I think these days it's mostly used as clues in crossword puzzles. They believed that wine freed you from inhibitions, and the idea that freedom can be good or bad. But the Romans also referred to Bacchus as liber, meaning free. That literally, wine freed you. And it is from the word liber that we get liberty and liberate and Liberty Bell. All important words to the founding of America.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that rounds out the 12, technically 13 or 14, depending on how you count gods, of the Greek pantheon.
I'm intrigued, just still on his story, the idea of him maybe being an addition from some other unknown.
He represents another darker way of looking at mythology. The amount of violence associated with him and his followers is not like any other of the Greek gods. They think he's part of a very different way of looking at the world. But the Greeks adopted him and the Romans kept him.
So his name is, in fact, it's Greek?
Dionysus is Greek. Bacchus is the Latin name the Romans gave him, or Liber.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Greek mythology is still hugely popular. It's still taught in schools. I had a class at when I was in college. One of the reasons why kids in particular can identify with them, because look, it's this family, and they mostly fight with each other all the time, and they have tons of secrets they're all keeping from each other. They're like a real family. The more ancient gods of Babylon and so forth, they're interesting, but Inanna and so forth never seemed like real people. Right. The Greek gods have strengths and weaknesses. They have character flaws. They seem frighteningly real to us. The Greeks saw gods as being just like us, except more so. They're all the strengths and weaknesses of human beings stretched out and made infinitely powerful, so we can see ourselves in them. And to this day, people identify with them.
And I think sort of role reversal as well is it kind of gives humans the ability to see themselves as something greater. Yeah,
you identify with something that you look up to, even if it's flawed.
Yeah.
And the Greek gods are certainly deeply flawed. All of them had their issues. And there's some of the few gods that have such distinct personalities to them.
Right.
There's one of the reasons why they're so popular. Rick Riordan's gone on to work with several different mythologies in his universe that he's created, but he started with the Greek gods because those are the ones that most represent ancient gods in the minds of people.
Yep. Very relatable.
Very much so. Yeah, almost everybody can find a god or two that they can relate to.
And that's, I remember we had mentioned earlier on how you can sort of pick and choose.
You can. And the one advantage of having a pantheon over monotheism is that one person worshipped Apollo, one person worshipped Zeus. They were in the same pantheon, so it wasn't a big deal to them. Athena was worshipped exclusively in Athens. Anyone could worship Athena, though. So there wasn't this rivalry between their followers.
Right.
They're pretty laid back about that sort of thing. So they didn't have really religious wars. The Greek city-states had wars for every other reason you can imagine, but not religious wars.
Interesting.
Yeah, as a kid, having grown up in a monotheistic culture, I found that idea really fascinating. I read Bullfinch's mythology and Edith Hamilton's mythology when I was very young. And they both inspired me that started me on my lifelong study of mythology that continues to this day.
Absolutely.
I hope you've enjoyed this.
I think you've done a great job of presenting something that you love so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope everybody's enjoyed it.
I have.
All right. And we will see you again in the future. Until then, I have been Ed.
And Solitaire.
We'll see you again. Until then, be safe.